Now, we are on the edge of what could be the final break of our talks with the EU. The immediate row has been precipitated, as we heard, by the British government's willingness to break international law to override part of the withdrawal agreement signed just last year. I'm joined now by Simon Coveney, the Irish government's Foreign Affairs Minister. Mr. Coveney, welcome. Now, accusations of bad faith are being expressed on both sides at the moment. There's a lot of anger around. Let me read you what Boris Johnson said about your side, the EU, yesterday. He said, "We never seriously believed that the EU would be willing to use a treaty negotiated in good faith to blockade one part of the UK, to cut it off, or that they would actually threaten to destroy the economic and territorial integrity of the UK." What's your message to Boris Johnson?
Well, my message to the British people, first and foremost, is that there's only one side that is threatening to break international law here. There's only one side in this negotiation that is effectively breaking its word. There's only one side in this negotiation that has already broken commitments in what's called the political declaration, which, of course, is a document that was signed in parallel with the withdrawal treaty. And so the EU has remained consistent. What the EU wants, what Ireland wants, is a deal that's good for the UK, but that's also good for the EU, so that we can build a future partnership based on trust and prosperity. And what is happening right now is that as of last weekend, the British government has made a decision to effectively create enormous tension in these negotiations, with very little time left to get a deal. By effectively saying to the EU, either give us what we want in these negotiations, which essentially is something that's not consistent with what we've signed up to in an international treaty less than 12 months ago, or we will pass legislation anyway to implement that. So that is not the basis of a trusting relationship that can get an agreement on the implementation of an international treaty which is complex and difficult and requires compromise on both sides to get that deal done. Instead, the British government, in my view, is behaving in an extraordinary way, and British people need to know that because outside of Britain, where this issue is being discussed now, the reputation of the UK and Britain as a trusted negotiating partner on important issues like this is being damaged in a very serious way.
Well, let me put to you the other side, which is that Michel Barnier, the lead EU negotiator, was very clear this week that he was not prepared to give Britain third country status at the moment. And to be clear to people watching, that would affect the flow of goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. And that is why Boris Johnson and ministers are so angry. They feel that after that treaty was signed, after that agreement was agreed, the EU has taken a much, much harder line than they expected. And if that happens, that would indeed separate Northern Ireland from the rest of Great Britain, and that is why they're taking this extraordinary measure.
Andrew, you've been following these negotiations for more than 3 years now, and you're a pretty good detail person, and you know that that is a completely bogus argument. Michel Barnier's position has been firm, respectful, but clear throughout these negotiations. It took us 3 years to put a withdrawal agreement together, which was an international treaty signed up to by this British Prime Minister, who described it as a negotiating triumph after that, who brought it through his own parliament after that, who called a general election. No, let me finish, please. Who called a general election on the back of that, saying that it was a negotiating triumph. And after the UK then left the European Union in February, the basis for agreeing a future relationship, which was the political declaration, the British government moved away from that within weeks of leaving. And as of this week, is now saying that they will breach international law. No, but
that is a relatively familiar prosecution.
You seem to be suggesting that there are two sides that are equal in this disagreement. There aren't. There is one side that is breaking an agreement that was signed by both. Not both sides.
I am putting to you that there is real anxiety and justified anxiety in London about the threat to withhold third countries listing or third country status after this is all over. And that is a real and serious threat. Now, if that is not the case, you could now end this argument and move us all on live on television by saying Britain will be able to use third country status after this is all over. I, Simon Coveney, promise you. And then it would all be over and we could be smiling and move on.
Well, first of all, Andrew, as you know only too well, Simon Coveney does not direct these negotiations. Of course, after Britain leaves,
you know what I mean.
Britain has already left the European Union. When the transition period ends, Britain will be a third country, but a third country that needs to comply with international law and an agreement that the British government itself negotiated. So what we're talking about here is not simply breaching international law. We're talking about breaching an international treaty which determines international law that the British government themselves signed off on less than 12 months ago.
So,
and
I'm
you
sorry
can
to jump
create
in
as many
again.
straw men as you want in these negotiations if you're the British Prime Minister. But the
Straw
truth
men
is
or
the
not,
truth.
I'm sorry to jump
and
in
that
again.
is why former British Prime Ministers are now coming out and calling this out
as we've
for
said,
what it is.
as we've said on the programme
as is
already.
indeed the Chief Justice in Northern Ireland.
Indeed. Now, straw men or not, nonetheless, without third country status, which is being withheld at the moment by Michel Barnier, it is
And
not
it's
going
always
to be
been
possible
withheld.
for goods to pass freely from Great Britain into Northern Ireland. Are you seriously suggesting the EU would stop that would allow that to happen? Would actually blockade goods going from Britain into Northern Ireland? Because that, on the face of it, is what is proposed by Michel Barnier.
Sorry, there is no blockade proposed, and that is the kind of inflammatory language coming from number 10, which is spin and not the truth. What is agreed in the withdrawal agreement and in the protocol on Northern Ireland and Ireland is that there will be limited checks on goods coming from GB into Northern Ireland, because there is an agreement to prevent the need for physical border infrastructure on the island of Ireland between north and south.
Right.
And therefore, we have to ensure that goods are not travelling from GB into the single market through the Republic of Ireland. That is the whole basis of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which the UK designed along with the EU together to protect peace in Northern Ireland, which is what Tony Blair and John Major are talking about today. And that is what the British government is now looking to renege upon, which is why you sense a frustration in my voice.
I do.
Representing the government of Ireland, your closest neighbour and arguably your closest friend here, who wants an agreement that's good for Britain, good for Northern Ireland, and good for the EU.
So we can all hear that. We can all hear that.
Is deciding to deliberately move away from those commitments.
But given what you've said, given what's happening, this legislation is coming to the House of Commons tomorrow. The EU has said it must not be implemented. It must not be pushed to the House of Commons. The British government is absolutely clear that's not going to happen. They're going to forge ahead with it. Does that mean that the talks break down next week? Yes or no?
Well, look, the bill is a matter for the British Parliament, and I'm not going to get involved in that debate. The British Parliament will make its own decisions, but I think the EU has simply called this factually for what it is. If the UK decide to pass legislation which breaches international law in a way that fundamentally undermines commitments in relation to Brexit, in relation to the withdrawal agreement and the protocol on Northern Ireland, how then can the EU proceed with these negotiations to put a new agreement in place, which will be the basis of a future relationship, if existing agreements that aren't even a year old are being legislated against?
You're saying in effect,
and that is a question that the Parliament has to answer for itself this week.
You're saying in effect that trust has now broken down. But isn't the truth that the EU and Ireland need these talks to succeed? A no deal would be catastrophic for Ireland. One study says 50,000 jobs will be lost from your economy very, very quickly. The Irish agriculture sector will be very badly hit. And therefore, both sides need to get on for may or may not be bluster and actually come to an agreement, and soon.
Yeah, we all need this negotiation to succeed. Both sides do. The British government does. The British people do. So does Ireland, to a lesser extent, so does the EU generally. But in particular, Britain and Ireland will be the countries that suffer most on the back of all of the pressures that we face in relation to COVID and the economic wreckage that has flown from that in relation to certain parts of our economies. These are difficult times. We need to be honest with each other. We need to behave as modern democracies should. When we sign an agreement, we need to keep that agreement. And in my view, it is possible to get a trade agreement. It'll probably be a basic, pretty thin trade agreement, but it is possible to do that, to create the basis for an agreement around a level playing field for a competitive environment, to an agreement that has a governance model that can independently ensure that anything we agree will be implemented in the future, and most importantly, we can do a deal that prevents tariffs and quotas being imposed on trade between the UK and the EU and the UK and Ireland in the future. If we can't do that before the end of the year, well then both the Irish and British economies are going to be damaged significantly, and that will be a significant failure of politics, not anything else.
A failure of
so
politics.
that is why I would encourage the British government to change tack now, to rebuild trust in the coming weeks, and you will find that the EU and indeed Ireland is a solid partner in terms of getting a good deal for both sides between now and the end of the year.
Simon Coveney from Cork, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Much appreciated. Now then, so far, as we've been saying, Labour has been a careful critic of Boris Johnson's European tactics.